Very interesting, thank you. Those are the 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll continue the next part about the function of humanity on Earth. We have shown in the previous part that nature and also our Earth is a living organism, composed of invisible and visible areas and guided from the inside out. Now in this part we're going to see what this means for our functioning as humanity as part of the Earth. Now we can better understand the Earth through the important theosophical principle of analogy, as above, so below. And in this case starting with ourselves for a moment, because just as we as humans are built up with a spiritual, a mental and a physical or material part, you can also translate this to every living being, also such as our planet. And thus we are discovering more and more how all life on Earth depends on each other and works together like the cells and organs do in a body. The question now is, what would then be the organs of the living being Earth? Also if you look at the characteristics of consciousness. Now we looked at the Earth as composed of a spiritual realm, a mental realm and a material realm, but this threefold division is still a pretty rough one. If we want to look more specifically at the different functions or organs of each living being from a consciousness perspective, then a 7-fold division is more telling. We use this 7-fold division a lot in the Theosophia because it is not too detailed, but nuanced enough to distinguish each of these aspects clearly. And we have put here the Sanskrit names for these 7 principles, where Atman stands for the most universal or divine, Buddhi for the enlightenment principle, Manas for the thinking faculty, Kama for desire, Prana for the streams of vitality or life, the Linga Sharira for the astral or model body, and finally the Sthula Sharira for the material body. So this division of 7 can be applied to any living organism, to an atom, plant, animal, human, planet or star, and also to nature or the cosmos as a whole. To understand it a little better, let's first zoom in on how we can recognize this 7-fold division within ourselves. Because as human beings we are now developing or learning to express the 5th principle from below, the manas or thinking faculty, which is also where the word man comes from. Man is a thinker. And by this we conceive of thinking much more broadly than usual. We do not limit it only to the rational or intellectual. Thinking is forming a sphere of thought, providing a kind of biotope for thoughts. And those thoughts can be of many qualities, from emotional to intellectual, from impulsive to insightful or intuitive. To distinguish the different types of thoughts that we think, we can divide that thinking faculty into 7 aspects. And then we get the 7 thinking aspects, which we can easily recognize in ourselves. Because with the development of the thinking faculty, we have also gained the ability to think about our own thinking. We can reflect on ourselves, form a thought about who we are and how we think. So with the thinking faculty, our self-consciousness is also developed. We can identify with our thinking with different aspects of ourselves. And with that we can also realize our 7-foldness. Because in our thinking we can identify with one of each of the 7 principles. To give some examples, starting from below, we think physically when we identify with our outer body. So we say we are tired or hungry or thirsty. If we think according to the feeling aspect, then we identify with our emotions. We're angry, afraid, happy, sad. If we identify with the vital aspect in ourselves, then we have to take action, we are moving, we cannot sit still, want to do something about everything. If we identify with our desires, then we desire things, we want possession, status, pleasure, but also wisdom, for example. We recognize the intellectual aspect when we think primarily logically, reasoning according to strict rules and procedures, as we do in mathematics or in grammar or computer science. Then we have the insightful aspects, which is about seeing the coherence, the ideal, or when we realize the interrelation at a glance, which is what we also call intuition. Not just a feeling, but something, because something truly insightful we can always explain intellectually afterwards. And like spatial insight gives you an immediate idea whether or not something fits, which you can check afterwards by measuring it. And finally there is the experience of oneness or inspiration, in which our thinking is completely absorbed by being, absorbed in the greater whole. And these are for the average person, still very rare mystical experiences. Experiences which then usually come in flashes and which a person will not forget for the rest of his life. Now, this classification from the side of consciousness also helps us gain more insight into the composite nature of the Earth, especially as we now take another step toward our place as humanity on Earth. According to Theosophical, our planet Earth consists of 10 kingdoms of nature. And all these kingdoms of nature emanate or flow from the apex of the hierarchy, the sphere of the Oversoul, or Source Being, or the Silent Watcher. In every cosmology from east to west, this cosmic birth is spoken of from a point, a divine being who gives birth to the cosmos. That begins with some divine or spiritual beings, who can be called gods, but also Dhyani Choans, Buddhas, or angels, depending on the tradition. They are those beings who have achieved self-consciousness, some of them even on a cosmic level, and who have become co-workers of nature and its laws or habit patterns in the spiritual realm. Then there is the human kingdom. And in the human kingdom we are currently still learning to self-consciously work on with nature. It is actually our task to translate the inspiration from the spiritual realm into the mental realm. We're not yet sufficiently aware of this, although all religious traditions and great philosophies do in fact talk about this task, often in comparisons or with metaphors. But this is why we most unconsciously often work against nature and also see that nature responds. We will come back to that. Finally, we have the animal or beast kingdom, plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and 3 elemental kingdoms. They follow more or less unself-consciously the patterns of the higher realms. Now, if you're hearing this for the first time, you can probably imagine something when we talk about animals, plants, or minerals. But the elementals are beings in a realm invisible to us, who play a role, for example, in all kinds of currents, such as electricity, the phenomena in weather, but also, for example, mental currents. For example, our thoughts are also elemental beings. Also within the human kingdom in itself there is a hierarchy. And we do not mean by that certain positions in the world, but more a hierarchy in terms of compassion and wisdom. So we can recognize people who are more of an example of that. People who sometimes also do get leadership positions. Think of a Nelson Mandela or a Mahatma Gandhi. But usually they are a little more in the background. And then you have what are also called chelas or apprentices, who do not always make themselves known, but of whom Madame Blavatsky in 1875 was a recent example. These disciples also always tell us that they are only messengers of people higher than them. This is also how Blavatsky speaks of her masters, or teachers, who are also called sages, mahatmas, or brothers of the Lodge of Wisdom and Compassion. Human beings who in development are way ahead of the average human being in the development of consciousness. And also these teachers are inspired by the most advanced of them, who is also called the Mahachohan. He is in fact a representative of the hierarchy of compassion on earth and the inspirer for humanity as a whole. Moreover, he is the link to even more advanced beings, or Buddhas of compassion, of a cosmic level of consciousness. Now the Masters of Wisdom, Madame Blavatsky's teachers, who are the force behind the foundation of the Theosophical Society, our organization, write in one of their letters about the relationship between our planet Earth and the various realms of nature. And I quote, "The correspondence between the mother globe and her child man may be thus worked out. Both have their 7 principles. In the globe, the elementals, of which there are in all 7 species, form A. a gross body, B. her fluidic double, or linga sharira, C. her life principle, or jiva. Her 4th principle, kamarupa, is formed by her creative impulse working from center to circumference. Her 5th principle, animal soul or manas, physical intelligence, is embodied in the vegetable, in germ, and animal kingdoms. Her 6th principle, or spiritual soul, buddhi, is man. And her 7th principle, atma, is in a film of spiritualized akasha that surrounds her." Now let us look specifically at what the Master writes about the function of the human kingdom. Humanity then should function as the vehicle of buddhi, the spiritual principle of the globe. In other words, we are an essential organ in the physical functioning of the earth. The 4th leader of the Theosophical Society Point Loma, Dr. Gottfried de Bruycker, specifies it even further by saying that humanity as a whole represents the buddhi manas principle of the earth. By this is meant the thinking focused on wisdom, on coherence, insight and intuition, the capacity for understanding or idealism. Therefore, if we as humanity are to fulfill our function on earth properly and in harmony, our thinking should be guided particularly by the buddhi or enlightenment or wisdom principle, by following insight, ideals and intuition, by which also the inspiration or sense of oneness can flow from the highest aspect of thought through the insightful to the intellectual realm. One of the tasks that the Masters and Blavatsky had before them with the founding of the Theosophical Society in 1875 was also what can be summarily called to awaken the buddhi manas of humanity. And one way they did this was by revealing for the first time in thousands of years more of the secret teachings that had previously been esoteric or hidden in the various religious movements on earth. For this they offered more insight into the laws of nature, such as cyclicity, karma and the spiritual hierarchy of life and the process of emanation. Thus they showed that the ideal of universal brotherhood is not just a beautiful dreamscape, but is based on the ethical structure of the universe and the laws of nature. You see here how the spiritual pulses also work within humanity. Because if humanity as a whole is to function as the buddhi manas or wisdom thinking of the earth, then in a sense humanity is also a kind of conscience of the earth. And here we define conscience according to Theosophia as the sum total of all the ethical lessons we have accumulated as learning souls in previous embodiments or incarnations. And that conscience is also the gateway to the inspirations of intuition, and inspiration that flow into us from our imperishable part. So we as humanity, unlike animals for example, have historiography. We can pass things down from generation to generation. And we can record our moral lessons, for example as we have done with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as drafted and endorsed by all United Nations countries after the Second World War. Moreover, from the most advanced people, the teachers of the Lodge of Wisdom and Compassion, impulses come cyclically, often also when it is necessary because of turbulent times. For example, there is the Messianic cycle of 2160 years, in which Madame Blavatsky also acted. And there are smaller pulses every 100 years. You can see these as voicings of the earth conscience and intuition. But as with the voice of our own conscience, it is up to ourselves to listen and act upon it. The less we do that, the softer that voice becomes. But the more we also see the resulting disharmony reflected in Earth's nature as a whole and its various currents, circulations or migrations. However, in our long evolution as humanity, or rather as human monads or centers of consciousness, we have now entered a phase in which we will slowly but surely develop more and more of the spiritual and universal thinking aspects. As told 2 weeks ago, the entire evolutionary journey of consciousness within each hierarchy of life proceeds similarly. We told you then that in the great evolutionary journey of consciousness, each being in a particular hierarchy of life, the universe, or in miniature a solar system, or this planet Earth, begins as an unself-conscious God spark or monad. This monad enters the so-called downward arc, which is materially oriented, to develop the best possible vehicle in which the essentially divine or universal consciousness can begin to express itself. At about the lowest point of that material development, self-consciousness is then developed with the development of the thinking faculty in the human kingdom. From then on, we have the free will to also focus on inner realms and to go up the ascending arc. Then we develop further in the spiritual realm until finally, as self-conscious monad or God, we relatively complete our evolution in this hierarchy of life, be it a planet, a solar system, or maybe even the universe as a whole. At each stage in this development we repeat this pattern again. So where this is true of the universe at large, it is also true at the level of the solar system and at the level of a planet. Each of these cosmic entities, again, is a cyclic re-embodying being. So also our Earth. And basically, as a monad in each embodiment of such a planet, we pass through one kingdom of nature. Or in other words, we then develop a certain faculty of consciousness. So now we as monads in this embodiment of the Earth develop as human monads the thinking consciousness or thinking faculty in the human kingdom of nature. Now such an embodiment of the Earth lasts, according to Theosophical, about 4,320,000,000 years. And it is now about 8 to 9 million years ago for humanity that we passed the tipping point from material orientation to spiritual orientation. So in that great cycle of about 4 billion years, we are only just past the halfway point. So as humans we still have a very long way to go to further develop our ability to think, especially spiritually. So it's not surprising that we still see a lot of disharmony. Also because karmically we are still working out the consequences of the turbulent periods in our long evolutionary journey, or history. At the same time, we have left the lowest point behind us and also activated enough inner potential to create more harmony in the future. Now you might also call this complete picture the macrocosmic migration of the monad through this universe. And if you look at this migration from the perspective of our function as human beings on Earth, this is primarily a movement or shift of mentality. And there are countless incarnations in between. Maybe once here on Earth, then once there. Now if we look at the principle of migration in the human sphere, it is also a flow from high to low pressure areas to create harmony. That same example that we gave of air pressure dividing itself over two chambers, it's, well, more or less similar for groups of people. Only in this case, it is less automatic than with, well, let's say atoms or with animals who instinctively follow the patterns of nature. Because with human beings, with our thinking, conscious free will also plays a more significant role. For example, if you go to a concert and the doors of the hall open, people usually also spread fairly gradually across the room, even when they don't have fixed seats. It's analogous to how air pressure spreads across two chambers. But with people, you immediately see that it's not just a physical issue, because at a concert there are all kinds of inner preferences at play. Some prefer to be in the front, others prefer to have an overview perspective in the back, and it all depends on individual needs or desires. This is immediately an example that movements in the physical realm are the result of what is going on in the more inner, in this case, the mental realm. Now the same is true of migration. But the moment blockages or, on the other hand, uncontrolled currents, say tidal waves, arise in one area, this can lead to an expression of disharmony in a lower area. And our thesis is that if migration stagnates or flows uncontrollably on a higher plane, then it seeks an outlet on a lower plane. Now in the third and final part of this lecture we'll elaborate on that further. First, a short summary of this part. We've discussed that according to Theosophical, the Earth is a living being. This applies to both the physical sphere itself, which itself is a vehicle or body of the composite of an even wider being of cosmic consciousness operating through this outer sphere. But if we look at the Earth as this physical sphere, it consists of 10 kingdoms of nature, from unconscious kingdoms to kingdoms that cooperate self-consciously with nature as a whole. Now we humans have as yet developed only limited self-consciousness, but are learning to expand it and also to cooperate more consciously with nature. And this is also our function as organs of the Earth. We should represent the organ of wisdom thinking. And finally, we discussed that we humans are just past the halfway point in our evolutionary development on this planet. Spirituality will play an increasing role in the evolution of our thinking faculty. Now, exactly what this all means for working on with nature and the practical and ethical side of migration, we will talk about that in the next section. Let's have a short break of 3 minutes and we'll see you after that. Okay, welcome back. Mariska, are there any questions?
Yes, at this point there are 2 questions. And the first one is, can we live on another planet?
Yes, it's a good question. We already discussed in the previous part that actually we are at home in our solar system, including what we in Theosophy call the 7 sacred planets. But if we talk about living on other planets, we should really think of ourselves as centers of consciousness, as in essence spiritual beings, now being embodied on this earth with an earthly vehicle, with made of the building blocks belonging to Earth, so to say. And if we will be embodying on other planets, but according to the bodies fitted for those planets. So please do not think of us in our current state, current bodies going to Mars, and maybe we will be able, like we did on the moon, to go to Mars. But the question is, if we as human beings go to Mars, actually are we in the sphere of Mars, or are we more or less, widening our earthly sphere to another physical place? Because right now, and Mars is a bit different, because Mars is now in what we call obscuration, or sort of sleeping phase. But for instance, Venus right now is full of life. It has all these different, you could say, organs working there, life waves of different qualities of consciousness working right now, which we do not recognize as living beings, because we are looking with our earthly perspective, trying to recognize life as something that is equal to life as we know it. So it takes also, you could say, a Venus type of consciousness to recognize that, and we're not as yet so far that we are able to. But we will be able if we develop further. And there are beings, according to Theosophy, who can have such a communication with a larger part of consciousness within the solar system. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the next question. Now that so much karmic disharmony is emerging, does this mean in our phase that we are able to guide this towards harmony? Is that also related to the ascending arc that we are just on?
Yeah, I think very well put. We have enough knowledge to prevent so much disharmony going on right now, because actually in our long history as human beings, we have already learned all these ethical lessons, and we know, because otherwise we wouldn't have created a universal declaration of human rights. I mean, we all know that violence doesn't solve anything, but still we are ruled by fear and the idea that others will harm us, etc. So that creates a lot of disharmony again. But let's hope we will be courageous enough in the future, more and more courageous, to let go of these ideas and not fall back into these states of violence, etc., which is really past our average mentality. So, but it takes, it also, it's really a temptation for us, because karmically we have not yet, you could say, dealt with all kinds of consequences or effects that we still have to deal with. However, when you see how we deal with these problems, it only makes them worse. We see that still every violent act is another seed, another seed from which effects will sprout, we really have to be strong to not let us tempt ourselves into ideas like revenge, etc. But we all know that we all actually know what to do. It's not that difficult. We all know that, well, actually what we have to do is to not get tempted into violence, and to try to discuss things, to work things out on a mental level, and to see the how do you say, the fellow humanity in the other. And well, this is not new. Everybody knows, but we just have to act according to it. Yeah.
Well, you say everybody knows, but is there not a difference between people in how they already awaken or
Well,
conscious?
of course there is, but I would say that especially if we talk about violence, more or less everybody knows. Of course, there are always a few exceptions, but if we would really act from these, well, our most inner values and convictions, then we would also create this protective atmosphere around a few exceptions of maybe, well, I don't want to call, well, yeah, there are also, I don't know the right words, but retarded or people who are a bit behind in their mentality. We can help them and protect them to not fall into these traps.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we can, but we have to also be confide in ourselves that we can. Yeah.
Those were the questions for now.
Okay. Thank you. Then we will continue to the last part. And